An early call to the emergency services initiated a disturbing search for a small boy. The outcome of this story shook everyone involved. On the morning of the 13th of October 2015, a dispatcher in the city of Haddon, New Jersey, received a call from 22-year-old David Criat. The excited young man reported that upon waking he had not found his 3-year-old son Brandon at home. David suspected that the little one might have independently opened the door of their first-floor apartment during the night and left the house. David then called the child's mother, 21-year-old Samantha Donato. When she heard the news, Samantha ran barefoot out of the house without hesitation, got behind the wheel, and raced to David. She drove as if in a fog and could not comprehend how such a thing could happen. After all, Brandon had never run away before and was even afraid of the dark. Samantha and David had met while still students. Shortly after their graduation, Samantha became pregnant, and the couple decided to marry. David could hardly wait for the birth of his firstborn. Brandon grew into a cheerful and energetic boy. In the year 2014, however, Samantha learned of her husband's infidelity and filed for divorce. Despite the separation, the former spouses maintained a good relationship for the sake of their son. David adored Brandon and regularly picked him up on weekends, proving himself to be a caring father. The 12th of October 2015 seemed to be an ordinary day. David picked up his son, as always. No one could suspect that soon something unforeseen would happen. Suddenly, there was high activity at the police station. Disturbing information came in about the disappearance of a boy. A search group was quickly organized: police patrol, dog handlers with dogs, and local volunteers. Everyone understood. Time was working against them. Every minute counted. The investigator met with the boy's father, David Criat. It was obvious that the man was very disturbed. He told that he had last seen his son in the evening when he put him to bed. When David woke up around 6 in the morning, he decided to check on the child. When he entered the room, he found an empty bed. After searching the apartment, the father realized with horror Brandon had disappeared. The initial investigation revealed no signs of a break-in at the entrance door. The further search also brought nothing unusual to light in the house. This confused the investigators. Meanwhile, extensive search operations were conducted in the surrounding area. The dog handler was given Brandon's house shoe so that the dog could pick up a scent. The dog, having picked up the scent, confidently led its handler along the street to a nearby wooded area. At the edge of the forest, the dog discovered a barely visible path. Following this, they descended a slope and reached a small stream. The dog handler's gaze involuntarily lingered on a disturbing scene at the shore. In the water, a motionless figure could be seen, in which the long-missing Brandon Criat was identified with horror. The news of the end of the search immediately attracted the attention of local journalists, who soon surrounded the location. The investigators who arrived at the scene were confronted with a puzzling picture. Brandon was in an unusual position in the water. He wore pajamas and socks, but the lower part of his clothing was in disarray. The investigators' trained eye immediately noticed a strange detail. Brandon's socks looked unexpectedly neat, which did not fit the environment in any way. The circumstances under which Brandon was found indicated that he could not have gotten there alone. The long stay in the water had destroyed many important pieces of evidence, and nothing was found nearby that could have helped with the investigations. Hope now rested on the results of the medical examination. The investigators now faced the difficult task of informing the boy's relatives about what had happened. Samantha, Brandon's mother, was the first to learn. When she heard the news, she froze in shock and could not utter a word. The boy's father, David, reacted more violently. Despite his condition, the investigators asked him to compose himself and tell about the last day with his son. After calming down somewhat, David told, before going to sleep, he had read fairy tales to his son, tucked him in, and put him to bed. In the next room, he heard the boy still mumbling something to himself. Then it became quiet. After making sure that his son had fallen asleep, David tried to call his girlfriend who was studying in New York, but without success. Assuming she was already sleeping, he also went to bed. According to Samantha Donata, Brandon was very afraid of the dark and would never have left the house without his father's permission. This led the investigators to suspect that someone might have broken into the house and taken the boy. In search of clues, the police questioned neighbors and residents. Meanwhile, other investigators searched for surveillance camera footage near the incident location. They managed to find a camera about 70 meters from the needed point. When examining the images, the investigators tried to discover Brandon or someone near him, searched for flashlight light or other clues to understand what had happened on that fateful evening. Unfortunately, reviewing the video brought no results, but this was not the only disappointment in this case. 3 different experts examined Brandon's condition, but to the investigators' surprise could not reach a common conclusion about the exact circumstances of the incident. They only suspected that lack of air might have been the cause. How exactly this happened, no one could say with certainty. Moreover, despite the unusual position of Brandon's clothing when he was discovered, none of the experts conducted additional examinations. This negligence of the specialists would later play a role in this case. 10 days after the discovery of Brandon Criat, the investigators decided to check the phone of Brandon's father without physical evidence. The police confiscated David Criat's mobile phone to examine his messages, calls, and everything that could help the investigation. When checking the phone, the investigators noticed that David had called his 17-year-old girlfriend, Julia Stansky, 10 times on the night before his son's disappearance. The experts discovered about 9,000 messages between them. When reading the correspondence, they noticed that the couple had a warm relationship. But everything changed after Julia was accepted at university and moved to New York. Gradually, their communication became increasingly tense. The relationship between Julia and David became increasingly tense. She often hinted that she wanted to end their connection and mentioned other admirers. These messages triggered violent reactions and strong feelings in David. Particularly disturbing was Julia's dissatisfaction with how much time David spent with Brandon and dealing with Samantha, the boy's mother. Julia openly expressed her dislike of children and her discomfort about Brandon's presence. Nevertheless, David insisted that his son would always be a part of his life. After examining this correspondence, the investigators decided to speak with Julia Stansky. It turned out that she was in Haddon that weekend after Brandon suffered the misfortune. However, Julia claimed to have left the city on the 12th of October early in the morning at 6:48 by express train to New York. When Brandon came up, Julia immediately admitted that she felt no particular affection for him. She told them that she had made her attitude toward children clear to David from the beginning. According to her words, she suppressed negative feelings when meeting with Brandon, but always expressed her objections to David about the necessity of communicating with the child. This attitude toward Brandon seemed unusual to the investigators. They suspected that Julia Stansky might have something to do with the boy's mysterious disappearance. However, after checking her alibi, they were convinced that she could not physically be near Brandon at the critical time. The video recordings from the station cameras on the morning of the 12th of October confirmed Julia's departure, and early in the morning of the 13th, her phone signal was located in New York. After Julia Stansky was excluded from the circle of persons of interest to the investigation, the investigators decided to check everyone who had contact with Brandon. One of the investigators who had spoken with David Criat after the incident with his son noticed something strange. David not only answered questions but also hurried to volunteer as much information as possible. His reaction to the sad news seemed unnatural to the investigator, as if it had been rehearsed in advance. This prompted the investigators to pay special attention to David Criat, since he was the one who had last seen his son. The examination of David's correspondence with Julia from September 2015 revealed his jealous character and suspicion of his girlfriend's infidelity. David was obviously nervous when she spent time with other students. Of particular interest to the investigators was a dialogue between David and Julia from the 6th of October 2015. In this conversation, Julia persistently asked David to come on Friday evening. However, his answers were evasive and philosophical, suggesting that one cannot always get what one wants. Then the conversation took an unexpected turn. Julia mentioned David's son and expressed the wish that David would stop seeing him. David's answers became increasingly enigmatic. He spoke of the possibility of changing the future but not the past. Julia's final question sounded particularly disturbing. She asked when the son would disappear from David's life and how long she would have to wait for it. Further examination of David Criat's phone showed that he constantly monitored Julia's activities in all her social networks. On the evening of Brandon's disappearance, David discovered a message from a classmate in her Snapchat account. After that, he tried to call Julia, but all his calls remained unanswered. The investigators decided to invite David Criat for another interrogation. This time, with new information from the mobile device, they focused on his actions on the evening of his son's disappearance. David told again that he had read 3 fairy tales to Brendan before bedtime. After the little one fell asleep, he tried to reach Julia, but unsuccessfully. He also claimed to have gone to bed around 10 in the evening and woken up at 6 in the morning. When asked if he had done anything during the night, David initially answered negatively. However, after persistent questioning, he confessed that he was very disturbed because of Julia's date with another man. He checked her Snapchat page and saw a message from an unknown guy. David searched and updated her profile until about 1:30 in the morning before falling asleep. It turns out that David Criat had initially not told the truth about his activities on the night of his son's disappearance. Moreover, when examining the photos on David's phone, the investigators discovered a recording that aroused their particular interest. The photo was taken about 2 days before the incident with Brandon, at a location that was near the place where the boy was later found in an alarming condition. The investigators also found out that David considered this place special, endowed with a certain energy. He was often there alone, or with his girlfriend Julia. The investigators sensed that something was not right in this story. When David Criat realized that he was being considered as a possible participant in the case of his son's disappearance, he turned to a lawyer. This complicated the work of law enforcement agencies, as they could no longer communicate directly with David and clarify the details of that fateful evening and the last hours in Brandon Criat's life. On the 11th of January 2016, the police arrested David Criat, based on data obtained from a mobile device. During the arrest, he remained apathetic, offered no resistance, and sat silently in the service car. At the station, charges were brought against him in connection with the disappearance of his son, Brandon. According to the prosecution, David learned late in the evening of the 12th of October 2015 about his girlfriend Julia's date with another man. Overwhelmed by jealousy and desperation, he possibly decided that eliminating his son, as Julia wanted, could save their relationship. After that, the investigators suspect David brought Brandon to a place he considered special and where he had often been with Julia. He left his son near a stream and calmly returned home. In the morning, David called the emergency service and reported Brandon's disappearance to deflect suspicion from himself. At the beginning of the year 2016, a lengthy court proceeding began in connection with Brandon's mysterious disappearance. Julia, who had recently turned 17, appeared as a witness in this case without coming under suspicion. However, the investigation encountered significant difficulties. The absence of direct evidence, genetic traces and eyewitnesses, as well as the ambiguous results of medical expert opinions, led to the jury being unable to reach a unanimous verdict. As a result, a new hearing was scheduled. This turn of events came as a surprise to the investigators and Brandon's relatives. It was clear to everyone. If in the second trial the jury again had doubts about David's involvement, he could be completely acquitted and set free. The new trial was scheduled for early July of the same year. However, shortly before the scheduled date, David unexpectedly proposed to make an agreement about a guilty plea. In his official statement, he merely admitted that he had created a situation in which his offspring could not breathe, without revealing further details or reasons for this incident. According to the agreement reached, David Criat received a sentence of 10 years imprisonment for negligent actions with aggravating circumstances, instead of the originally threatened 30 years. This also gave him the chance of early release after 8 years. David Criat's relatives remained convinced of his innocence. They claim he only agreed to the guilty plea to avoid a new trial. Samantha Donata, Brandon's mother, still cannot cope with the loss. She often visits the place where her son was found in critical condition. The residents have set up a bench with a memorial plaque in Brandon's honor nearby. Sitting there, Samantha remembers her child and thinks about how a person she knew for many years could be capable of such a terrible act that has caused her so much grief. At the beginning of summer, students throughout Great Britain waited longingly for the end of the school year and the beginning of the holidays. Among them was also Danielle Jones from East Tilbury in the county of Essex. On the morning of the 18th of June 2001, Danielle prepared for school as usual. Around 7:55, she said goodbye to her family and set off for the bus stop to take the school bus. At 14:30, the telephone rang in the Jones family house. At the other end of the line was Danielle's teacher, who was inquiring why she had been absent from class. This question struck Danielle's parents like a bolt from the blue. They could not understand why their daughter had not appeared at school. She had no reason to miss class. Daniela Sarah Jones saw the light of the world in autumn 1985 in the county of Essex. Her parents, Linda and Tony Jones, lived together with Daniela and her 2 younger brothers in the small village of East Tilbury. Daniela was rather reserved, preferred the comfort of home, and was sometimes shy in the presence of other people. Nevertheless, she possessed an excellent sense of humor and had many friends. Most of all, Daniela loved animals. At home, she had 2 small, fluffy rabbits that she adored above all else. When Daniela's parents received a call from the school, this news deeply disturbed them. They thought, even if their daughter had decided to skip class, she would definitely come home before nightfall. After all, Daniela had always been afraid of being alone at night. Throughout the day, Daniela's relatives and friends tried to reach her. They wrote messages and called her, but there was only silence. This behavior did not fit Daniela at all, which worried everyone even more. Danielle's story left many questions unanswered. She always kept her parents informed about her plans, even if she only wanted to visit the neighbors. Usually she called home as soon as she reached her destination. When it became dark and Danielle was still not back, her relatives became restless and decided to begin the search. Linda Jones stayed at home, hoping for a call or her daughter's return. Around midnight, when it became clear that something must have happened to Danielle, the parents turned to the authorities for help. The investigators first questioned the missing person's environment. After it was determined that Danielle had no reason to leave the house and all her things were still in place, it was decided to begin the search immediately. Danielle's younger brother shared a strange observation. In the morning, he had seen through the window how his sister left the house and took the usual path, but then suddenly turned around and went in a different direction. This seemed unusual to him. The search operation was launched in full scope. Investigators, dog handlers with tracking dogs, relatives and friends set off along Danielle's usual route that she normally took to school. The mother hardly closed her eyes all night. She waited for her daughter to come through the door at any moment as usual. In the next 3 days, the family searched every corner of the house but found nothing significant. However, they managed to locate people who had seen the missing person that morning. A couple of students noticed how she went to the store next to the bus stop. It turned out that she had never gotten on the school bus. Soon, the search actions expanded. The police went from house to house in the small town. The investigators spoke with all residents and asked them to check their sheds and extensions. At the same time, The response from society was overwhelming. Everyone tried to support the family, and many locals participated in the search themselves. But even after several days of intensive searching, no traces could be found. The relatives and close ones of the missing person were desperate. Nevertheless, they continued to believe that their beloved daughter was alive and would soon return home. The local law enforcement officers recognized the seriousness of the situation regarding missing Danielle and handed the case over to the Central Investigation Group. They appointed a special officer as liaison to the family. His task was to support the relatives throughout the entire investigation and to inform them promptly of new information. The officer was to build a trusting relationship with Danielle's relatives in order to better understand the atmosphere in the family and create a profile of the missing person. During the conversation, the parents expressed concerns regarding their daughter's interaction with her uncle. Stuart Campbell, the husband of Tony Jones's sister, was close to Danielle. This 43-year-old construction worker and father of 2 children often spent time with his niece and her brothers when they were younger. He played with them and treated them like his own children. In conversation with an investigator, Mrs. Jones shared her observations about Stuart. According to her words, he gave the impression of a person with excessive self-esteem, although he also possessed a certain charisma. Her husband Tony maintained a friendly relationship with him, but occasionally confessed to his wife that there was something about Stuart that triggered a vague unease in him. Over time, Stuart began to pay increased attention to Daniela, his niece. He got into the habit of picking her up after class and offering her a ride. This caused Daniela discomfort, especially due to the curious looks of her classmates. Stuart frequently invited her to the cinema and cafe and persistently tried to hold her hand during walks. Stuart's visits to the Jones family house became too frequent, up to 4 or 5 times per week. Finally, Linda and Tony decided to limit his stays with them. Tony remembered an incident when Stuart, sitting next to Daniela on the sofa, persistently asked why she was so embarrassed and blushing. When Tony heard this conversation, he decided to intervene and asked Stuart what was wrong. Campbell immediately waved it off, however, explained that everything was fine, and immediately moved seats. After the conversation with the authority representative, Danielle's parents shared that they were only now beginning to understand. Behind Stuart's behavior, there might be more than the usual relationship between uncle and niece. It seemed as if Danielle had tried to keep away from him. Linda and Tony admitted that they had earlier explained his actions with sincere affection and the desire to be closer to their family, and everything that seemed strange to them, they attributed to harmless misunderstandings. They tried not to pay too much attention to it, out of fear that it could seriously damage family relationships if their suspicions proved to be unfounded. After all, Tony's biological sister was Stuart's wife. One day after Danielle had stopped getting in touch, Tony decided to visit his relative. The house greeted him with silence, however. When he looked through the window, he surprisingly noticed a video surveillance system in the living room, which seemed unusual to him. Even stranger, however, was the behavior of Stuart Campbell when Tony finally met him. He seemed completely indifferent to Danielle's disappearance. Furthermore, Stuart was the only one who showed no interest whatsoever in her search. At the same time, the local media continued to report intensively about the disappearance of Danielle Jones. Given the growing public interest, the representatives of law enforcement decided to organize a meeting with journalists to provide official information about the case. At a meeting with journalists, the investigators shared details about how Danielle had disappeared. They asked viewers of the local news to report any information that could help with the search. This step proved to be successful. Numerous calls began coming into the police station. One of them particularly interested the investigators. An eyewitness reported that on the morning when Danielle was last seen, he had noticed a similar-looking girl. She was standing next to a blue delivery van and arguing loudly with a man. Interestingly, Danielle's uncle, Stuart Campbell, owned a similar blue delivery van. This detail aroused serious suspicions in the police. Fears arose that Campbell might have abducted his niece in an unknown direction. Before the investigators invited the suspicious person for a conversation, they decided to examine their past. What they discovered caused them great concern. It turned out that this person had attracted the attention of law enforcement agencies many years ago. At the end of the 80s, they were arrested for inappropriate behavior toward a young person. They confessed their guilt but got away with a suspended sentence and left the courtroom as a free person. Both Linda and Tony knew that their new relative had problems with the law in the past, but when they tried to find out details, Stewart deflected and assured them it had been trivial matters. He convinced everyone that he had become a victim of slander, since the court had ultimately acquitted him. The further investigation led to shocking revelations. The police uncovered about 30 cases in which Stewart Campbell's name appeared. It turned out that over many years he had been luring young women to him by posing as a trendy photographer. Once he was alone with them, he forced them to participate in questionable photo shoots and claimed they were shoots for glossy magazines. Given Campbell's past and his unusual relationship with the missing Danielle, the investigators had to either clear the suspicion against him or find evidence of his possible involvement in the mysterious disappearance of his niece. Since Danielle could not be found, the investigators developed the theory that Stewart Campbell might be holding her against her will at an unknown location. They organized surveillance in the hope that he might lead them to the whereabouts of the missing person. However, his behavior only reinforced the suspicions of the law enforcement agencies. He did not show the concern one would expect from an uncle whose niece had disappeared without a trace. Instead, Campbell strangely spent time in parking lots photographing cars that resembled his own silver Nissan. When it became clear that the surveillance was not bringing the desired results, the investigators decided to arrest Campbell. On the 23rd of June, 5 days after Danielle Jones's disappearance, Stewart Campbell was taken into custody. During questioning by the investigators, Campbell was immediately made clear that they had valid reasons to believe he was informed about the situation with Danielle. However, Stewart immediately began denying everything and claimed to have no idea where she was. Furthermore, he insisted on having a close and trusting relationship with his niece. According to Stewart, Danielle's relationships with her parents, Tony and Linda Jones, had deteriorated as she grew older. He told them that he acted as a mediator between Danielle and her parents to help the Jones family avoid a break, since according to his statement, they were on the verge of falling apart. In the course of the conversation, it turned out that Stewart Campbell had a watertight alibi. At the time of Danielle's disappearance, he was not in Eastleborough. He had driven to the neighboring town to get building materials to help his neighbor with renovation work. He had no receipt because that store did not have the needed goods. On the way back, he stopped to call his wife and tell her this. After returning home, he immediately went to the neighbor to continue with the renovation work. The story with the case of Danielle Jones left many questions unanswered. Despite Campbell's dubious alibis, the law enforcement officers could not find sufficient grounds for his continued detention. He was released on bail until the completion of the investigation. Given Campbell's past, the prospect of his release caused the investigators considerable concern. They suspected that he could pose a danger but had no solid evidence to file charges. In this context, it was decided to search the Jones family house again. When searching Daniela's room, they found a pencil case with 2 notes. The first read, "Hello, Princess. In case you didn't notice my previous messages, I decided to leave one more. I want you to know, I miss your smile. Kisses." When the investigators showed Linda Jones these notes, she was shocked and declared seeing them for the first time. She told them that the entire Jones family had gone on vacation a few weeks before Daniela's mysterious disappearance. Linda suspected that Stewart might have broken into Daniela's room in their absence and left these messages. Daniela's father remembered an important detail. Before their departure, Campbell had installed a new back door in their house. The suspicion arose that he could have made a spare key for the new door at exactly that time. The investigations led to the necessity of examining the Stewart Campbell family house. After obtaining the appropriate permission, the investigators began the inspection. A variety of photographic equipment was discovered in the house. which in itself did not arouse suspicion. However, the findings took a disturbing turn. Among Campbell's personal belongings, pictures were found that caused concern. The photographs of young people were of an inappropriate nature and seemed to have been taken with the homeowner's own camera. Furthermore, pictures of similar content that had been downloaded from the internet were found. The most disturbing discoveries awaited the investigators in the attic. In a double bag were objects that gave cause for unpleasant thoughts: underwear, movement restriction devices, and adult toys. Particular attention was drawn to a pair of white stockings with barely visible traces that were sent for further examination. During the inspection, a blue delivery van belonging to Campbell was also confiscated. Stuart Campbell claimed he had information that Danielle had not disappeared, but had decided herself to leave the house due to constant disagreements between her parents. To confirm his statement, he presented the investigators with a message allegedly received from Danielle's number on the day of her disappearance. It read, "Hello, Stu. Thank you. You are forever the best uncle. Tell Mama, I'm so sorry." This information gave Danielle's parents hope that their daughter was hiding somewhere. However, they were extremely worried that she had not contacted them until now and had not returned. A text analysis specialist examined the alleged message from Danielle. He determined that it was written in capital letters, although Danielle normally used lowercase letters. The investigators requested data from Campbell's mobile service provider. It turned out that the call Campbell allegedly made to his wife when he returned from the hardware store on the day of Danielle's disappearance was made from Easleborough and not from where Campbell claimed to have been. But the most remarkable thing was that the signals from Campbell's and Danielle Jones's mobile devices were located near Campbell's house and remained active even 30 hours after her disappearance. 30 days after Danielle Jones had broken contact, her concerned relatives turned to the public through the media. They hoped to find new clues and any information that could shed light on the matter. The family called on everyone who might know something or might have seen Danielle, but for some reason had not yet told the authorities to finally share the information known to them. After some time, Jones's relatives, together with representatives of law enforcement agencies, distributed about 1,500 flyers with photos of Danielle. At the same time, the investigators received the results of the examination of the white stockings found in Stuart Campbell's attic. The experts' conclusions were disturbing. Traces were found on the garment that were connected to both Campbell and Danielle Jones. Based on the collected data, Stuart Campbell was taken into custody without the possibility of release on bail. He was brought to the station where he was charged with possession of inappropriate images. However, this charge served only as a formal reason for the arrest and allowed the investigators to continue the investigation and prepare more serious charges in connection with the disappearance of Danielle Jones. A relative of the suspect visited him shortly after his arrest. After a conversation with him, the relative informed the law enforcement officers that he was deeply convinced that the arrested person was telling the untruth. It also turned out that the suspect kept records that the investigators would later refer to as a diary of the missing person. He noted there every interaction with her, whether it was a phone call or a sent message. These records made it clear that he was excessively fascinated by her. Despite the lack of clear evidence for the disappearance, the investigators had gathered sufficient clues to file charges for involvement in the mysterious disappearance. After the charges were filed, the suspect was under observation by law enforcement agencies for almost a year. During this time, more than 500 reports came in from all over Great Britain and Europe, stating that the missing person was allegedly well. This caused considerable difficulties for the local police, as each of these reports required thorough verification. Had there been even the slightest possibility that she was still somewhere, and this report had gone unnoticed? This could have been a weighty argument for Campbell's lawyers in court. In the months before the trial began, efforts to find Danielle were significantly intensified. It was not only about finding key evidence for the investigations, but also about providing her relatives with the much-needed spiritual comfort. 12 days before the beginning of the trial against Campbell, human remains were discovered. The investigators determined that they belonged to the missing student named Millie Dowler. As it later turned out, a certain Levi Belfield was involved in her disappearance. He was to answer for his actions a whole decade after the discovery of Millie's remains. On the 14th of October 2002, the trial against Stuart Campbell began, the man who was married to the sister of Danielle's father. Linda and Tony Jones trusted him. He presented himself as a caring relative. The story of Stuart Campbell raised numerous questions. He was accused of a serious offense against Danielle Jones. However, Campbell appeared confident and unconcerned in the face of the charges raised, as he knew that Danielle had not been found. The investigators suspected that Campbell secretly communicated with Danielle without informing Tony and Linda. It seemed as if he had been very fascinated by her and had tried to sow discord between the girl and her parents. Danielle was last seen talking to someone in a blue delivery van that resembled Campbell's vehicle. On Campbell's attic, a pair of white stockings with his and Danielle's DNA was found. His personal records revealed an unhealthy interest in young people. An important piece of evidence were messages allegedly sent by Danielle. An investigation revealed that Campbell himself was the author and was trying to mislead the investigations. Mobile service provider data refuted his alibi. Throughout the entire court proceedings, Campbell maintained silence. He only occasionally passed notes to his defenders when something did not suit him. After almost 3 months of trial, the jury reached their verdict. Stuart Campbell was found guilty and sentenced to a long prison term, with the possibility of review after 20 years. Until 2019, the whereabouts of Danielle Jones remained unknown. Linda Jones supported an initiative in memory of Helen McCourt, whose fate took a tragic turn. This proposal was intended to restrict the rights of those who withhold important information from investigators. Helen worked in an insurance company when her life came to an abrupt end in the year 1988. Ian Sims, the man who was connected to her disappearance, never revealed all the circumstances of the case. The call for the passage of a new law gathered over 100,000 signatures and found support at the highest government level. In the year 2021, a book titled My Relative with a Dark Past saw the light of day, whose author was Alex Sharkey, the brother of Stuart Campbell. In this work, Alex openly shared the story of his life alongside his brother and described in detail the events that followed the mysterious disappearance of Danielle Jones. When 2 decades had passed since Danielle's disappearance, the law enforcement agencies of Essex organized a memorial event in her honor. The investigators assured Danielle's relatives that they would not give up hope and would continue the search so that the family could find peace and close this sad chapter of their lives.